It's no secret signing a contract to fight another human in a cage is already pretty risky. Who knows what could happen? You could lose an eye, break your leg, you might even shit yourself. After years of grinding, you might finally get somewhere, and then it becomes even more important to take the fights that make sense for your finances and your career. But guess what? There's plenty of fighters out there who said screw what's sensible, am I right? And they accepted fights that, if this was a scary movie, would have had you screaming at your screen. I'm Balian from MMA On Point, and these are 10 insanely risky fights taken with everything to lose. Number 10. Gegard Mousasi versus Ilir Latifi. As one of the most decorated athletes in combat sports, the news that Gegard Mousasi would be joining the UFC after the Strikeforce merger was music to fans' ears. In his career, he'd managed to win the Cage Warriors Middleweight Championship, the Dream Middleweight Grand Prix, and the Strikeforce Light Heavyweight belt. And when he entered the UFC in 2013, he was still the reigning Dream Light Heavyweight Champion. Why is all this important? Well, when he arrived, the UFC gave him an appropriate matchup. The number 2 ranked light heavyweight at the time, Alexander Gustafsson. He was on a 6-fight win streak. It was a great fight for the European scene, and they were going to give them their own fight night in Stockholm, Sweden, and the winner was going to fight John Jones, so yeah, pretty good. But unfortunately, just 1 week before the event, Alex had to pull out.
I slipped, I hit my head, I cut myself, but I didn't think about it more after that.
He received a cut in training, and the Swedish MMA Federation said he wasn't able to compete. So Alex's teammate Ilir Latifi stepped up and filled in. Now for Gegard, he pretty much had everything to lose. This was his UFC debut, he was on an insane win streak, and he was supposed to be set up to fight for the title, but now he had to take on a complete nobody and could end his UFC run before it even got started.
It's a high-risk fight, you know. Yeah, I don't have a lot to gain. Against Gustafsson, I had the number 1 spot maybe.
Thankfully though, Gegard was able to take the sledgehammer all 3 rounds, dominating with his striking. Alex got a free pass to the title shot though, and Gegard decided to change weight classes anyway. Number 9, John Jones versus Shogun Rua. Everything about John's early MMA career was just an anomaly, to be honest. He started fighting professionally in 2008, and by the start of 2009, he'd already gone 7-0 and won his UFC debut. It was pretty good for your first year. By 2011, he was already fighting the number 1 contender Ryan Bader, who'd also been on a similar UFC upward trajectory, and he was undefeated. John snatched his neck, snatched submission of the night, but then something a little crazy happened. Joe Rogan approached him for the post-fight interview and revealed that his teammate Rashad Evans had a knee injury and was out of his title shot against Shogun Rua. He put John on the spot and asked him, "Will you take that fight?" I don't know, man. Sounds pretty risky to me. Working all this time to get to the number 1 spot, you just had to take out the only other undefeated contender in the division, and now you have to take the title fight on short notice? John didn't miss a beat though. He accepted the fight and stepped all over Rashad's toes in doing it, but risk or no risk, John has always had the power of belief, and when he walked in there to take out Shogun, well, he looked like the happiest kid in the playground. He also made it look easy, finishing the legend and the champion in the 3rd round, silenced any doubters in the process as well. I mean, John was such a freak athlete back in the day, we probably should have seen this one coming, but still, accepting a short notice title fight literally in your post-fight interview sounds like risky business to me. Number 8, Wanderlei Silva, the Pride Heavyweight Grand Prix. I'm probably going to guess that most of you already know who Wanderlei Silva is. During the Pride FC era, he was the dominant middleweight champion, he'd beaten all challengers to his belt, and was probably the scariest man in mixed martial arts. After he defended his belt against the only man that had beaten him at middleweight in Pride, Ricardo Arona, we thought life would continue as normal with the axe murderer sitting on his throne of conquered enemies. But he had other plans. In a move that surprised pretty much everyone, he announced he'd be entering the 2006 Heavyweight Grand Prix tournament as a replacement for the injured Fedor. Now, this was something he did not need to do, but he wanted to test himself, and as a Pride champion, just felt like it was what champions were meant to do. He drew one of the toughest SOBs around, Fujita, for his first matchup, and actually became the first man to ever TKO him. So that risk actually paid off, but it meant he was fighting Mirko Cro Cop in the 2nd round. They'd fought to a draw 4 years earlier, but that was when Cro Cop had only just started in MMA, and he had 22 fights since then. He was also much bigger than Vandy, and he landed his famous head kick, and the axe murderer went to sleep. Wanderlei risked his health, his reputation and status as an unbeatable champion, and a future fight against Chuck Liddell in the UFC that wasn't actually allowed to take place as he'd just been KO'd by Mirko. All for the tournament he honestly didn't really need to compete in, he just did it for the love of the game. Number 7, Daniel Cormier versus Anderson Silva. There certainly was a lot of buzz around the former Olympian Daniel Cormier when he arrived into the UFC. He was an undefeated heavyweight wrecking ball who then cut to 205, became John Jones's worst enemy, but ultimately was bested by him at UFC 182. John was then supposed to fight the next challenger, Rumble Johnson, but Jones was stripped of the title after a hit and run. DC and Rumble fought instead for the vacant belt, and DC was the champion now. And he defended it in an epic fight with Alexander Gustafsson, and was supposed to fight John again, but had to pull out with an injury. But eventually, at UFC 200, the rematch was booked between DC and John Jones, which was an absolutely massive fight, perfect to headline the historic UFC event. But just 3 days before the event, John was flagged by USADA and he was removed from the card. DC said he'd take another opponent if it made sense.
If anybody would fight, I would fight. I mean, why not?
Well, how about Anderson Silva on 2 days' notice? Now remember, at this point, John Jones was the interim champion. The Silva fight wasn't going to be for the title, but if he lost to him, who's to say what would have happened? More than that, DC immediately became the bad guy.
I'm honored and I'm thankful for Anderson for stepping up, but he's got to get it.
He was taken on a beloved legend and got booed before the fight, during the fight, and after wrestling him for 3 rounds. He was only trying to save UFC 200, pretty much a lose-lose scenario for Cormier, but he took the fight anyway. Number 6, Michael Bisping versus Kelvin Gastelum. After 24 fights in the UFC, Mike Bisping finally achieved what he set out to do. He knocked out Luke Rockhold and was finally a world champion. But after defending the belt at home, he had a bit of a super fight with Georges St. Pierre, which unfortunately ended with him losing the belt in a fight that he was dropped and choked out. We weren't sure what was next for Bisping, perhaps a few more Legends fights, maybe even retirement. He had commentary, movies, and certainly a lot of issues with his eye, like he didn't have one. But instead of taking some time off, just 3 weeks later, Anderson Silva failed a USADA test right before his fight with Kelvin Gastelum in China, and Mike volunteered as tribute. Now, some of you might be thinking, his career is nearly over, not exactly a risk, is it? Well, I mean, you tell me. He'd just nearly been knocked out, he couldn't see out of his right eye, and his left was getting worse, and he was taking a fight with a southpaw KO artist who just finished Vitor Belfort and Tim Kennedy. And it was on 3 weeks' notice. A quick turnaround would get him back in the title picture maybe, but Kelvin was on the ascension, was still young and hungry and coming for everything Mike had. Undoubtedly, a legend like Mike Bisping deserved a full camp to train for a proper retirement fight, preferably back home in England, but he lost out on that opportunity as well after risking it all against Kelvin, who finished him in just 2.5 minutes. And it would be the last fight of his career, as his good eye was now also having issues. Mike probably feels differently though. It could have just as easily gone the other way, I guess. Number 5, Petr Yan versus Sean O'Malley. So, depending on what kind of UFC fan you are, you might have some pretty strong opinions about this matchup. Aside from the obvious that thinks Sean is taking a massive step up in competition and he could ruin the hype he's already built from himself, there's also something to be said about Yan accepting this fight. Having 2 losses to the current champion is never a good position to be in the division, but he's going from fighting for the belt to fighting the number 13 guy. And you can't tell me that's not risky.
Не каждый, в принципе, там боец из топ-5 захочет драться с 13-м номером в рейтинге. Это рискованно. Ты там рискуешь своим местом.
Okay, if your answer is there's no risk, it'll be easy. It's going to run him down like your dad did with the lawnmower and all the toys you left out in the garden. No? Just me then. But if he does lose, where does that leave him? It's going to be hard to get back to the title, you better believe that. Yan has already faced the best at the division, and rather than take on another top 5 challenger, he's going straight for the star power, just like in Smash Bros, and aiming to punch the hype out of O'Malley. So yeah, as well as that, Sean's basically going against his own ethos to slowly make his way up the division, and from no contesting the number 9 ranked guy to fighting the number 1 contender, it's a risk for sure.
Like, he's beat some of the best guys in the world, and I've got a no contest. My best wins a no contest over Pedro Munoz.
But I personally think his striking game matches up quite well with Yan. The pressure, if you ask me though, is on Petr, who stands to lose everything he's worked for in the wake of the Sugar Show. Number 4, Conor McGregor versus Chad Mendes. When promoting the Notorious' title fight against Jose Aldo, they went on a literal world tour to Rio de Janeiro, Vegas, Boston, Canada, London, and Dublin. And not only had Dana spent more money promoting it than any other matchup, it had basically become the most anticipated fight in UFC history. And then Aldo got injured, he bruised a rib and had to pull out. So the biggest fight in MMA history was about to not happen, but so much planning and promotion had already gone into 189. Dana showed up at the Mac Mansion to deliver the bad news, and Conor said he'd literally fight anyone.
I'm gonna take another one is the question.
I didn't know that was an option, actually.
Which I did. I knew that you would say that.
2 weeks until the biggest fight of his career, and Conor just didn't even care who the opponent was. When the word came back it would be Chad Mendes, it raised even more eyebrows given he was a wrestler, something Conor had yet to face in the UFC, and it left a big question mark next to his record.
Well, it's always been the question, how will he do against a wrestler? Now we answer that question. He hasn't been training for years with JJ for no reason.
So with basically everything to lose, and rather than wait for Aldo, Conor accepted the fight with Mendes. To add more to this, he'd been suffering with an ACL tear all camp, and at least in his words, was on one leg. So he could have pulled out when Aldo did, but he didn't. UFC 189 went ahead with all the bells and whistles, and the short notice fight seemed to work both ways, as in the second round Mendes gassed and the notorious one put him away. Still, it could have gone really bad for Conor, and then who the fuck knows how the rest of MMA history would have played out. Number 3, Reiner Derrida versus Aung San 2. So here's a fighter you should be aware of. Outside of the UFC, there have been a couple of undefeated guys who've looked like killers, but Reiner Derrida has just been something else. Since 2019, the Dutch Knight has picked up 6 wins in 1 championship and remains 16-0, undefeated, and the current middleweight and light heavyweight champ. That's right. He became the middleweight champion when he choked out Aung San in the first round. The Burmese Python was the champ at the time, and he hadn't lost in 3 years. After losing to Ridder, he went back to light heavyweight to defend his belt against Vitaly Big Dash, but he tested positive for COVID just a week out, and on 6 days' notice, yes, 6, Derrida said, "Yeah, I'll fight him," and stepped into the ring of combat. Now this was a bit crazy. Derrida was undefeated. The middleweight champion could probably have got a shot at the light heavyweight title if he really wanted anyway, but he put into jeopardy his opportunities outside of one, and honestly, there was absolutely no reason for him to step up and save this event on 6 days' notice, other than he's just a badass, I guess. The fight went all 5 rounds this time, but when it was over, Derrida was also the light heavyweight champion and earned every bit of those 2 belts. Number 2, Tony Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje. At one point in time, 2 guys were on a collision course for the lightweight title, Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson. Tony won the interim title but was eventually stripped, and for the 5th time the UFC tried to make the Eagle versus El Kukui. But this global pandemic thing happened and Khabib couldn't leave Russia. So rather than wait for a 6th opportunity and a shot at the actual UFC belt, Tony was offered a fight against the top contender, Justin Gaethje. Tony was on a 12-fight win streak, had beaten everyone the UFC put in front of him. He deserved to fight Khabib, and then just 11 days before the event on April 18th, Dana announced it would be postponed until May 9th. But Tony, being Tony, decided to cut weight and make weight on April 17th anyway, which actually gave quite a few people cause for concern, because you're cutting weight twice when he really didn't have to. But when you're talking about having everything to lose, this was the literal definition. Number 1 contender, 12-fight win streak, completely locked in as the next guy to fight for the belt, but he accepted the challenge Justin Gaethje brought, and unfortunately, the fight didn't go his way. Justin pretty much outstruck him across 4 rounds before finishing him in the 5th. Tony risked it all to keep alive UFC 249 amid pandemic, and Justin just proved to be the better man. Number 1, Francis Ngannou versus Cyril Gane. No sooner had the predator of the heavyweight division captured UFC gold, an interim title fight was already being scheduled with his former training partner Cyril Gane claiming the belt. Francis had to return to Cameroon and wasn't able to be ready when the UFC wanted, which led to a breakdown in the relationship with himself and Dana White. Some MMA media and fans even believed the UFC was deliberately pressuring Francis. But there was even more risk involved. He was on the last fight of his contract, one that he wasn't particularly happy with.
I will not fight for 500,000-600,000 anymore. I mean, it's over.
But he still accepted the fight with Gane anyway, even if it meant a loss could see him removed from the UFC entirely. He was effectively in a promotional war with the establishment. More than that, he was also nursing a serious MCL tear, one that had his coach, Eric Nixick, begging him to pull out of the fight.
Myself, Dewey, Markel, we all suggested that he should. Wow. That we didn't think it was the right move to take this fight.
But Francis felt it was his moment to make a statement and remind people that he was the champion. Truth was, there was a lot on the line for the new champion. Aside from the usual pressure that comes with his first title defense, I mean, has anyone ever had more on their shoulders going into a title fight? I don't think so. He beat Gane across 5 rounds and cemented his place as the undisputed heavyweight champion. But what's actually happening with Francis, and when will he fight next? I mean, who the heck even knows? Yeah, don't ask me why a bunch of these fighters took these fights. I mean, risky doesn't even come close for some of them. But you know what's not risky? Checking out Ben Rosette's music. You heard his song in the intro. I know you love it. Go check him out on Spotify and on social media at Ben Rosette. Comment then, after going through this list, who would you give the Balls of Steel trophy to? Hey, who's got the most cojones? Who took the riskiest fight? Let me know in the comments down below, and give us a thumbs up because you know we worked hard on this one. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. And go ahead and subscribe if you want to see more from us. We do free videos every single week. I've been Balian. You can follow me here. Boom. See you in the next one.